Hello friends, welcome back. Hope you're doing well. In this video, I will be demonstrating some masking tips and tricks in Luminar Neo. If you've been here for a while, you know that I've got a course that's coming, a masking masterclass for Luminar Neo. I'm this close to launching it. I want to give you an idea of the kind of things that I do, just a couple of quick demos on masking in this image to show you how masking is really a transformative technique that you can employ to really get the results that you want. So I'm going to take a look at this photo shot in Iceland on the Luminar photo camp last year. And it started like that, and all I've done so far is develop raw, and it looks like that. So if I go over to edits and you look at develop raw, you can see slight bit of contrast, increase, reduction in highlights, a slight bump in shadow, and a pretty small reduction in temperature, and a little bit of a bump in tint. So that's the basics overall, just kind of setting the stage for my edit. Took it from there, and it's now there. Always start with develop raw, always shoot raw files, and it's a great way to get started to kind of set the stage for your edit. The thing about it, of course, is number one, you're working with that rich data of a raw file, but number two, you don't have the ability to do any masking, and that's where we're going to cover a couple of those things that I like to do in this video. Now, if you saw my last video, you'll know that I talked a lot about tips that I think make a huge difference on getting to an edit that you really love. For me, the second thing I generally do in an edit is come in and play with super contrast, because it's just incredibly powerful and it gives you so much control over the light in your image. I think it's the perfect complement to using develop raw right out of the gate. So in this case, those are the moves that I made with super contrast. If you look at the before and the after, you can see it's, for lack of a better word, flattened the contrast, meaning it's a little higher contrast here, a little bit brighter sky, a little bit darker in the foreground, but now it's a little bit more even across the image, but there's still plenty of contrast. And that's what I love about super contrast, giving that tonal control or control of contrast in the tonal areas, highlights, midtones, and shadows. It's just the kind of the perfect way to complement develop raw and get started. And speaking of getting started, now that I've done that, I'm going to go back into develop, and this is where I start going into some masking on this image, because I want to make some specific edits that really control specific things. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to manage the exposure in the sky just a little bit. So mask AI, and that's on the masking menu or tab, of course. I click on mask AI, and it starts to figure out, using the algorithms there, what are the different elements in the sky, or excuse me, in the photo. You can see it finds the sky. I'm going to go ahead and click that to select it, and boom, there's my sky. And this did a really good job, I think, along the edges. Sometimes I will come in with a brush and at a little bit lower strength, paint over some of those edges just to make sure that they're covered accurately. Like down here, it didn't really cover it, and sometimes I'll smooth along those edges just where it needs to be done. You might see a little bit sometimes of a kind of a halo if you don't really smooth along those edges. So I may come along and do something like that with the brush just to complement what Mask AI has already found for me. And doing that with the brush at a lower strength is kind of like adding a gradient, because Mask AI does not have a gradient. This is one of the things I talk about and demo in the course that I'm creating that'll be available soon. And I walk through examples of how to use that in your photo, and you get my actual photos to work with. So now that I've done that, I feel like I've got a pretty good mask in place. And now I want to go to the adjustments. I'm going to pull the exposure down slightly because I want to kind of level out a little bit. And I'm creating, I don't know if dramatic is the right word for it, but I'm definitely increasing the drama over what the file kind of looked like initially. And I'm going to pull the highlights down slightly as well. Something about like that. I'm just taking this sky from that to that, where it's basically a little bit more level. And in fact, I might give back a little bit. I think it does make sense to have a little bit brighter sky versus a little bit darker foreground, simply because the light, generally speaking, is going to be coming from the sky. So your eye might expect to see it. But nonetheless, I went from that to that with a little mask, a little brush, and I'm ready to move on to the next tool. Now this time what I want to do is add some structure, but I only want to add it to the mountains, but also the reflection of the mountain. So again, this is where I'm going to use some masking tools. I'm going to check out Mask AI and see what it comes up with. Sky and water, not what I want to use. Well, technically I want to use some of the water, but it's going to find all the water. So I'm going to go ahead and click on mountains, and it found that quite well. And I'm going to back out of this, use the brush, and just come in and paint along here because I also want to include the reflections as part of what I'm going to add structure to. Okay, so I've just painted that in with the brush, and I've now got my mask in place. And what I want to do is add structure. And I specifically wanted to include the reflection simply because I kind of like that. It makes that reflection a little bit crisper, a little bit crunchier. And if you look at the before and the after, it makes both the mountains and the reflection pop. And so that's something that I often do. And again, something I talk about in my course where I'm stacking masks and combining them to make sure I get the best possible selection. Now that I've done that, I'm going to close that tool. I'm going to open it again. I'm going to get a mask and a brush. And this time what I want to do is just get this reflection down here without the mountain. So once again, I'm going to kind of go around these edges with the brush. I do recommend using a pretty soft brush majority of the time. It's almost never that I use a hard brush. I use a soft brush at softness of 100, about 100% of the time. Very rarely would I use anything other than a soft brush. Okay, so a couple of moments of brushing. I have something like that in place, and now I just want to come in and reduce the structure here simply because I like to isolate and make that reflection a little bit softer and just a little bit kind of dreamier, for lack of a better term. It's a fairly minor adjustment, but before and after, and again, the mask helped me really isolate that area. And speaking of isolating areas, I'm going to do that now with a different kind of mask on Accent AI. I'm going to get into masking and radial gradient, and I'm going to drag that here from the center, and I'm going to click invert, and then I'm going to make some adjustments to the shape of this so that it really kind of pops in the area that I want it to pop. And if you're thinking, hey Jim, that sounds like right around the center of the photo, then of course you are correct, my friends. And I'm going to do something about like that, and I want to go into Accent AI and just take this adjustment up a little bit. And, maybe about a 40. I don't want to overdo it, but Accent AI does a lot of great things to a photo, which is both the plus and the minus of that tool. It's great that it does so much, and if you don't control it with a mask, it does so much stuff to every bit of a photo. So I'm a big fan of controlling it with a mask, and radial mask is one of my favorites. Again, I dive deep into radial masking in this course, but if you look at the before and the after, nice little pop to that area. I think that looks good. And now just a little bit of a wrap up, some global edits. I'm going to give a little bit of warmth, like a 20 or 22, something like that, to the highlights. Leave that in the red. I'm going to go into color harmony, and in split color warmth, I'm going to go a little bit warmer with the warm tones, so pop those a little bit, and a little bit cooler with the cool tones to pop those a little bit. While I'm at it, I'm going to go into color balance, go into highlights, and I'm just going to add a little bit to the red, so about a 4 or 5, and a little bit to the magenta, like a -4 or -5. And these are just little color tweaks, but if you look at the before and the after, you can see it's creating a little bit richer overall color look, which I like. I'm just playing up the colors in the sunset. And in this case, I just did it, both of these color adjustments globally, simply because I'm trying to tie everything together. There are times when I go in and do some specific color edits with a mask. And again, I show a demo of that in the course, but in this case, I think it makes sense to kind of tie it all together. So I'm going to use that one just globally across the entire photo. And the last thing I'm going to wrap up with is develop. Sometimes I'll come back at the very end of my edit and just do kind of a global adjustment. In this case, I'm going to add smart contrast, about an 18 or 20, something like that. Just trying to give it a little extra kick, and maybe put on the highlights a tiny bit and lift the shadows a little bit. All this is just a kind of a minor global tweak at the end. Develop is the best tool for that because you have so many controls. You can come in here, play with temperature, tint, saturation, and all that. I've got plenty of color going on, so I don't really need to do that. But I wanted to play with the light a little bit, and that's where develop comes in. And that's why I usually use it quite often at the very end of my edits to just give it a nice little finishing touch to my photo. There it is before, and there it is after. Let's look at the before and after. Speaking of which, the photo started like that, which is quite a bit flatter and quite a bit less intense in terms of the light distribution and the color and all that sort of thing. And there it is now. And in fact, if you feel it's a little too much, I totally get it. It is fairly saturated. Just, hey, I'm using develop globally at the end. I could come in and just reduce that a little bit, even reduce the vibrance if I want to, and still have a nice looking final edit. Before and after. And if you want to take a look at this sliding window, you can see Masking and a few other edits and tweaks really have a massive, massive impact on a photo. That's what my course is all about. If you want to learn about it, of course, it'll be coming out really soon, my newsletter. By joining that at the link down below, you'll be among the first to know. And that's it for this one, my friends. I wanted to walk through an example of how I use masks to isolate, target, and be specific with my edits to get the photo that I want to get, which really results in a complete transformation, I think, of an image. Before, after, that's how this one went, my friends. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon. I appreciate it. And until next time, adios.